Okay, well, good afternoon and welcome. We're so pleased to have you joining us today. Thank you for joining us for this webinar of the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent. We're so excited today to be talking with Dr. Velma McBride Murry about the role of the family in the healthy development of Black and African American youth. My name is Andrew Fuligni. I am the co-executive director, along with Adriana Galvan, of the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent. I'm also a professor in the departments of psychology and psychiatry here at UCLA. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. We will be live tweeting about this conversation in our Twitter account @DevelAdolescent. We'd love to stay connected with you beyond this webinar, so we encourage everyone to follow us there. You can also get a deeper dive into adolescent development by subscribing to our podcast called Adaptivity in the Apple Podcasts or through Spotify. We're going to leave time for questions in the last 15 minutes of the webinar. You can add your questions through the Q&A function throughout the discussion, and we'll get to them toward the end. And also our discussion today is being recorded and will be available at the UCLA CDA website after this session. Now, as some of you know already, earlier this year, UCLA CDA released the first report from the National Scientific Council on Adolescence, called The Intersection of Adolescent Development and Anti-Black Racism. That report, created by the council and led by co-director of the council, Joanna Williams, looked at the impact of racism on our Black youth and where we as a society need to make changes to both eliminate anti-Black racism and also support the healthy development of our youth in the face of the ongoing challenge of structural racism. In the report, we focused on the role of different contexts of adolescents' lives, peers, communities, media. And one of these key contexts, of course, is the context of the family. Families are a primary source of support for our Black youth and provide critical racial and ethnic socialization. Programs that recognize the strength of our Black families and support them can help promote healthy development and positive outcomes among youth, regardless of which specific barriers they may be facing in their daily experiences with racism. So we're really excited today to be talking about one empirically based effective program designed to support families called Pathways for African American Success. This is a family-based program designed to build on the strengths of Black and African American parents and their communities in ways that prevent unhealthy behaviors and promote the academic success for youth. And the program was developed by our guest today, Dr. Velma McBride Murry. I'm so thrilled to see you today, Velma. Thanks so much for joining us. Dr. McBride Murry is a nationally recognized expert examining ways in which racism affects family processes, behavior, and health outcomes of families. She is a chancellor-appointed university professor in the Department of Health Policy at Vanderbilt School of Medicine and community psychology at Peabody College, both at Vanderbilt University. She is current president of the Society for Research on Adolescence and serves on several national boards, including the Foundation of Child Development, National Academy of Medicine, and the Cultural Health Advisory Committee and Blueprints Advisory Board. And she's also a former board member of the National Academy of Medicine's Board of Children, Youth, and Families. And also most notably, well, I shouldn't say most notably, you have so many notables, Velma, I could go on forever here. But particularly notable, most recent accolade is that she was one of the 100 newly elected members of the 2020 class of the National Academy of Medicine, an honor that is so richly deserved, and many of us who have followed Velma's career over the years know how worthy that she is of that award. So Velma has translated research very specifically today. What we're going to be talking about is how she has translated research from longitudinal studies to inform the design, development, and implementation of 2 RCTs, randomized controlled trials, to test their efficacy in youth risk behavior engagement. The Strong African American Families and the Pathways for African American Success programs not only prevented high-risk behaviors, but also demonstrated important spillover effects, enhancing several educational-related outcomes among youth as they transition from middle childhood through high school. But I don't want to keep saying that because that's what Velma is here to do, is to tell you about the program and the important work that it does today. So Velma, again, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about your work.
I'm just really delighted to be here, Andrew. And as we were saying earlier, it's been too long since we've seen each other in person. So this is the next best thing, to be virtually
Yes.
connected this way. So I'm just delighted to be here today. And you know, as researchers, we just enjoy talking about our work. And so this is another opportunity to do that. What
Mhm.
was really amazing to me as I prepared for the session today is how long it's been since I started this work in preventive intervention research. And so I'll start with a story of how I got involved in this line of research, which I hadn't thought about sharing, but today is a moment of just reflecting back and thinking
Please
about the
do.
future. So when I was at the University of Georgia working with Jean Brody, we had this longitudinal study called the Family and Community Health Study, which really is served as a basis for the preventive intervention work that we did with the Strong African American Families and continued with the second generation program, the Pathways for African American Success. And we were writing all these articles from the Family and Community Health Study and identifying lots of wonderful things that were happening as reported by the families and the parents and the youth. And one of our staff person, Olive Conyers, I'll comfortably call her name, she said to Jean and I, when are you going to share this information beyond those publications that nobody reads for people like you? And so we said, well, you're talking about doing preventive intervention research, and that's not what we do. And she says, well, you should really think about doing that. So it was time for us to begin to think about the continuation of the Family and Community Health Study. And Jean and I decided that we would write grant applications to test some of the malleable protective processes that we were finding in this longitudinal research study that we had followed over 900 families for approximately 10 years at the time. And we decided to translate them into a preventive intervention program to really test these empirical pathways that we were identifying in our longitudinal studies and the theory behind it. And so that was the emergence of the Strong African American Families program that we call SAFE, and many people know about that program. So the next part of the story is it was time for me to begin to think about my part of SAFE was funded through NIMH and focusing on HIV/AIDS prevention. And so I was thinking about something that was innovative, new, to propose in this continuation. And I was visiting my youngest sister. So I have stories, I'm a storyteller. So I was visiting my youngest sister, still in the back of my mind, knowing that I needed to move forward with this competing continuation. And I observed while I was there, an interaction between my brother-in-law and my 16-year-old nephew, who was at the stage of about 6 feet, running around the house, similar to his father's height. And watching them around the dinner table was very different than what I saw when they went back to his room after dinner to play a basketball game. At that point, Allen Iverson, so I'm dating my nephew as well, was a key player. And so my brother-in-law took a character and my nephew took a character, and I watched these interactions between these two people running, moving around the kitchen as though you're in my space, you're in my space. Now they are intimately close to each other, not only playing the basketball game, but my brother-in-law was asking my nephew questions about his friends. And I said, what if we could move a inhuman program like SAFE into an interactive computer technology platform that we can then deliver to families? And that was the light bulb. I came back, talked to my program officers. They said, this was 2005, I think 2006 or 5. They said, no one is doing this. You need to write a precept, send it to us. Not only that, you need to pilot test something because we're not sure families are going to want to do this. That was the beginning of the pathways for African American success. So that's a long story, one, to tell you its origin, but the theory that this program is based on. So Andrew, if you'll show the first
Sure,
slide,
absolutely.
it would give the audience an idea of what it is that we were trying to target, and then how we've been facilitated that through a 3-arm study. So this is a 3-arm randomized trial, and the 3 conditions. This is very large. Can you make it a little bit small, Andrew? So the 3 conditions are the standard in-person group-based program delivery, similar to what most programs are. And then, but that's fine, Andrew. If you can see the full screen, then I'm fine. Can you see the full screen? Okay, great. So it's a 3-arm study. Small group families were randomized to small group, similar to the way traditional programs are delivered. The second group was randomized to an technology delivery platform such that there was no human around to deliver the program. The program is delivered totally through avatars, but they're interacting with the avatars. And then the third condition was the same information that was being received through the 2 active groups, but it was mailed to families in the mail. So they got mailings during the same weeks that we were delivering the other 2 active arms. And so the program was really designed to have an impact in 2 areas of families. One, the parents themselves. So the curriculum was designed to enhance those positive, involved, vigilant parenting processes that we had written about for many years from the longitudinal data. We also know the importance of fostering family relationships through parents and the way in which they communicate and interact with family members, and to encourage racial socialization that Andrew, you mentioned earlier about a key protective process in African American and Black families. And then our other malleable target that we had identified in our longitudinal research at the parent level was the importance of articulating norms and expectation clearly about what you want your child to do. So that was one area that we were intervening on. And the second area was for the youth, because the program is designed for to involve both youth and parents as interactive participants in the program. And so for the youth, we refer to these as interpersonal protective processes: setting goals, thinking about the future, school bonding, having a real sense of emotional and self-regulatory behaviors, acceptance in terms of a Black identity, and then identifying skills to resist risk by asking a set of questions that we found from talking to our own youth appear to really trigger them to be thoughtful about opportunities to engage in risky behaviors and what they can be thoughtful about to ask themselves questions about to avoid risk engaging behaviors. And then as they look at their age mates, to begin to have this low tolerance or acceptance for engaging in risky behaviors, and to be thoughtful about the peers that they hang around, such that they hang around with pro-social peers. Now, those 2 boxes then was really the essence of the curriculum. And our prediction was that if we enhance those parenting and youth protective processes, then it would lead to immediate changes in the youth that you see in the blue box, with the ultimate goal to facilitate low risk engaging behaviors. And for my grant, it was to reduce pregnancy and HIV AIDS exposure among youth. So that's the essence of the PAAS program.
And so this is the theory. So it's interesting when you said it earlier, you know, this light bulb went off in your head. These light bulbs for someone like you don't just come out of anywhere. This light bulb came up out of all of your work that had been done in the past of observing families and talking with families. And that produced the light bulb. And you can clearly, by outlining this theory of change, there's a lot that goes into this program. And so I think today we were going to focus on how you've taken this program that was originally in person and shown to be successful, and then how you really applied it in this virtual format. And so what really got you wanting to think about the virtual format? I mean, you had this aha moment, but at the same time, why go virtual? Why not just sort of stick the way that you have been doing it before? What was the main goal?
The main goal is a great question, Andrew, because it was more than just watching my nephew and brother-in-law sitting there playing basketball, virtual basketball. It was realizing the labor intensiveness of delivering in-person group sessions. When you do it in a way that it reduces and almost eliminate barriers, it means providing food, childcare, transportation, particularly for the populations that we were serving. And all of that's added onto the need then for staff to manage not only the program delivery, but childcare, transportation, and managing the food that we served during the time. All of these were wonderful pieces of the added part of delivering the preventive intervention. But it also meant that if families were unable to attend, you may have planned for 12 families and have only 2 families there. So you think about the expense and the energy associated with organizing, and the unpredictability of families' lives facilitate sometimes low attendance adherence. And all of that has to come into play when you're thinking about delivering family-based preventive interventions. The other part of it then was, because many of the families that didn't attend, it was because it interfered with work. And so I'm thinking, how can we move evidence-based programs and platforms that are much more efficient and easily accessible to families? And at the time, people were really beginning to get quite engaged in social media and texting each other versus talking to each other on the phone. And so I began to think about how technology had become so much a part of the way that families just did their business. And why should we then not take advantage of that and then began to test if this is a modality that would be applicable to families, would they be receptive to this? Yeah. And the only way to know that then was to test it. So this is really a delivery modality randomized controlled trial, because we wanted to know, one, would transporting an in-based curriculum manualized human delivered program into an avatar delivered program, would it in fact event similar kinds of outcomes that we were targeting? As I mentioned in the theory of change model, would we see similar changes? And because the golden standard would be to have high evidence of efficacy with large effect size, are we going to see that when we do that? And would Black families be open to having avatars interact with them and talk to them? And would it then events change? So it was really a question that centered around increasing opportunities for more easy scale up, for widespread distribution, but also to address the everyday life experiences that complicate families' lives. And if this is effective, then we would have the opportunity for it to be on demand, like Netflix, if you will. It's what I was thinking about. Not Netflix at the time, but on demand.
Yeah, right. Well, certainly, I mean, as you know, because of the systemic factors that these families are facing, irregular employment or, schedules, they don't know perhaps if they're in certain sectors, what their schedule is going to be like from week to week, having this kind of gold standard in-person multi-hour program can be challenging. And so clearly, I think a lot of people on this call who are excited about your program also are very eager to think about how can we sort of translate these things. Now, I know that you have on a couple of slides, and we'll go for to give people just a little bit of a taste of the way in which you tried to translate it. So maybe we can touch on that a little bit of what the outline looked like. but then also let's get back to also be sure to talk about the themes that you covered and how you incorporated the strengths of these families. And you had talked a little bit more about getting back to the issues of identity as well, substantively. So should I
That
go on
sounds
to the
good.
next
Sure.
slide
Let's
and
look at the
show?
next slide.
All right.
So the first thing we had to do is go back and look at the SAFE manual, and then begin to think about addressing the theory of change based on that. So what it required us to do, we started with sitting around a conference room, my graduate students and I, and thinking about what is it about this manualized version of SAFE that's primarily group dynamic, group support, group cohesion driven. So a lot of icebreakers and making sure people felt comfortable. And when you're in this virtual space, all of that goes out the window because you don't have to. It's like watching TV. So you don't have to go through that, which meant then we had to write what we learned from our instructional graphics person, storyboards. Not trained in graduate school to do this, had no idea what I was doing, except they said, what do you want the avatars to say? So in the next slide that you'll show, the first thing we did was to think about how do we identify who's using this program, because then the information is tailored based on the gender of the child and the gender of the parent. So we had to have a way of knowing that so that our programmer could program the program such that if Jonathan or Andrew was the youth participant, then we needed to know who Andrew's parent was, because that narrative is continued throughout this virtual program to create a sense of relatedness so that the human users would feel as though they were inside this virtual world and that the avatars knew who they were. So let's go to the next slide. And so this would be a youth entering the actual program. This is the 5th session where we're writing the script about what we wanted the young people to be exposed to around accepting your parents' advice so that you can resist risk opportunity situations. So the kid would enter the program by entering his name, clicking on the icon that would let the programmed algorithms know who they are. So we go to the next slide. So then the first thing we had to do, and see the blue graphics on the bottom of the screen, those are our youth avatars. So we had Trey, Nikki, MJ, and Sierra. And interestingly, these are real young people who were actually our voiceovers actors for the avatars. And Jonathan, who is a youth facilitator, was a graduate student at the time at the University of Georgia. And so we knew their personalities and we wanted to write the script so that it reflected their personality. So Jonathan, who was this really cocky young man, says, "What's up, PAAS youth?" And that's how he would always enter these sessions. But remember, we wrote this. My graduate students and I wrote this. So Jonathan is asking them about a time in school that they experienced a situation where they were feeling uncomfortable because they were getting pressured from their friends to do something that they knew was going to place them at risk. And so then he asked them, why would a person become tempted, which is how he characterized this. And so the young avatar youth would then respond. And we wanted their responses to be very reflective of how adolescents would talk. So for example, when Jonathan asked the question, Trey said, "I did because I kept having problems understanding my homework and my mother." So the charge before this session was for them to seek their parents' assistance with homework, and then for their parents to go to school to advocate for them if they were having problems. And so this is what Jonathan, the youth avatar, begins the session with. And he says, and so now that we've talked about that, we're going to also talk about temptations, because a lot of times temptations happen when you're in school. So then on the next slide, you can see where he's telling them to look at questions. We're going to talk about temptations now. And the narration was for Jonathan to get them prepared for the video that they were going to see, where groups of young people were talking about opportunities that they had available to them to engage in risk opportunity situations. And so one of the things to know is that we also supplemented the actual avatars with an embedded movie, so the kids could actually see real live situations where young people were faced with the various circumstances that we were covering in the actual video. We can go to the next video and just kind of thumb through these real quickly. So in this, when the video plays, and after the video, the next screen will show some of the interactions that the kids are having as a consequence of being exposed to the video. So then Jonathan tells them, now I want you to take a look at some temptations that some people might experience. Click on the ones that you've experienced. And so that's that interactive piece that that the young people, as well as parents, have these opportunities to go inside of this virtual space. And as they're going through these virtual spaces, they can watch the avatars doing the same thing. So it's almost like you can watch and you can model based on the peers that you're seeing doing the various things that you're doing. And at the end of this particular session, all the sessions, the young people and the parents have an actual comic strip that they print out that demonstrates how they responded to every session, every part of this session, as an artifact that they can take home and think about and discuss with their parents later. We can go to the next slide. And so this really ends up with him bringing them back, Jonathan bringing the group back, and then they're going to talk about some of the sessions some of the temptations that they had. And so one of the youth, Sierra, for example, said, one of my friends was trying to get me to skip school. And then I told her, no, I'm not going to do that. And so she kept pressuring me. Then the other avatars would go in and say, you know, when you do what people want you to do and you know it's not right, you have to think about whether or not you want to feel like you're going to be weak or lame as a consequence of that. And then what happens after that, Jonathan goes through these 5 questions that you should be asking yourself when risk opportunities happen. And then you can use that as a way of keeping yourself being smart and safe rather than giving in to the peers. And so all of the scripting happened ahead of our actually giving this script to a graphics designer to then listen to the voices of the live actors and then draw out these avatars that's reflective of the voices that he was hearing. And interestingly, the characters, Andrew, that he developed were so much like the real kids that he had not seen. It was just amazing to watch this happen. So let's just keep flickering through, and actually what I can do at this point is just show the avatar. So we can go on through. We did the same thing with parents. You can go to the next one. These are some of the things that we say what you can do: walk away, pretend that you have something else to do. We gave them a way out so that they wouldn't be teased as a consequence of not engaging in these risky behaviors. The other part of the program that really resonated for us, and it actually came from parents suggesting this when we were designing the SAFE program. So we translated that into the electronic version of PAAS as well. And so before the young people would leave their sessions, we had a creed that they were to say, and it was on this very Afrocentric framed, almost like a picture, and they would stand. So the avatars would stand, and then the human users would stand. It was as though they were holding hands, saying the creed, talking about the strength of African American families and the richness of their history, and that they're able to grow to be healthy, well-functioning adults because they make good decisions and they reach their goals. And so this creed was said not only in the youth sessions, but also in the parent session. And then they would come together as the family, avatar families and the human family, and they would then say it as a family. So I think in the next slide, it just shows the way in which we went through the parent session, similar kinds of procedures as before. So we can just go through this. And this was really about parents beginning to think about ways in which they can protect their children from risk-engaging behaviors. And the way that we did that, which is the next slide, I think, Andrew, we had them go back to visualizing what your life is like or was like when you were the age of your child, which is 11, 12, 13-year-old children. So think about what you were going through. And then once you think about what you're going through, and when they're doing this, they can see the parent avatars mimicking their behaviors, which is, let's just close your eyes and reflect back to when you were 12 and 13. And then the avatars open their eyes, and then the narrator, which would be a male and a female, Richard and Janice, would ask the parents, so what are you thinking about? What do you think their parents were concerned with? What are you concerned about? And inevitably, they're talking about the risk-engaging behaviors that we're targeting in the intervention. So we can go to the next slide. And keep scrolling, because this is just really further talking about what the parents are going to see and what they're saying. And then I think the next slide, you can actually see what these youth look like. And the kids, they're in the studio in the journalism school at the University of Georgia at the time, because we did because the project started when I was still at the University of Georgia. And so because we had made these connections with our community families, we just kept doing that. So my graduate student would take road trips down to Athens and work with these young people and their parents. And so they would go into the studio and do the recordings. So these are our characters, Sierra, MJ, and Nikki. And, you know, and that's what they look like in real life. So the human individuals are who these young people are. And so the smallest young person, I was telling Andrew earlier, the person who is the smallest, it also shows variability in adolescent development when you look at this picture, from looking extremely young to being quite mature in their looks. But the youngest person in the pink shirt grew astronomically during the production of this electronic version of PAAS. And in this session where we were talking about puberty, MJ's voice just squeaked. And Jonathan viewed that as a great opportunity to say, okay, we're talking about puberty today. So let's just talk about some of these developmental changes that's happening in your life. And so it was just the perfect melding of the reality of what was happening with this virtual setting that we were putting into place to capture the experiences of these avatars. And in the context of these youth lived experiences. And I think the next slide may show what our parents look like, or in a parent session. And so you can see our avatar parents sitting around the room. And we had the room really look like what a group of parents would be, with the place saved around the table for the human user. And we did the same thing for you. So when you enter into this virtual world and say your name, the avatar facilitators, human facilitators, would say, "Welcome, Ms. Brown." And then the avatars would look at the screen as though they really knew that you were there. So in this session, the parents are sharing some ideas about what their expectations are for their children around risk-engaging behaviors. And we can go to the next slide. And so what they're doing now is in the next slide, you can see what we mean when we call this program Pathways for African American Success. that's really the theme that draws all of the sessions together. We felt that we needed some visual image so that so that the parents and the young people would know where is this going? Why are we here? What's connecting all of these sessions? And we start the first session out talking about how life is a journey, and that the way in which we live our life on this journey has a lot to do where we end up being. And so at the end of this road, it really is this very, very bright sunshine space that almost looked like a door that they can go into, because we wanted to keep them being thoughtful about how decisions that they make along this journey, along this highway, along this pathway, has a lot to do with where they're going to land at the end of this developmental period. And so it's the highway that in each session, what we do, we have a place along the highway of where we are for this particular session. And the ultimate goal is to be successful.
Right.
I'm not sure what's on the next slide. And that's the program. So once we got all these storyboards finished, then the goal was, how do you tell graphics designers that know nothing about developmental psychology or families, how do you tell them what it is that you want? And more importantly, how do you talk with the program developers? Because they've got to take all these scripts and they've got to develop it. And so what we ended up doing was having a technology person who had worked with us for quite a while at the University of Georgia, who knew our work, but she was really a computer technology person. She was our translator. And I never thought about the fact that we just couldn't take these scripts, these storyboards to a developer and say, now make it alive, make it real, put flesh on it. But we needed someone to translate our language as social behavioral scientists to computer scientists. They had no idea what we were talking about. So we went through, so one of the lessons learned was that we're not trained, social and behavioral scientists aren't trained to be technology gurus. And that to move this from this human delivered space where we could do it because we were social behavioral scientists working with an instructional design person, but instructional writer, but to move this into another platform of delivery took skills beyond anything that I'd ever been exposed to.
Well, I'm sure it helped a lot that individual appreciated the science and knew about the science. And it seems that really it's sort of to get that blending together of the technology and the science, you really need people on both ends. As you know, there are a lot of app-based and technology-driven kinds of programs that haven't worked as well, and perhaps they haven't been able to get that beautiful nexus. But clearly this program worked. It's been empirically shown to work, and I'm going to ask Megan to put some links into the chat about the program that people can dig deeper a little bit. I want, if I can ask a couple of questions about the program, about the work that went into it. And so clearly you're focusing a lot on the situations that the families and the youth face on an everyday basis. Yes. And also you're asking for family input and you're welcoming family input into things that you might want to include. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you did that to sort of carefully listen to and incorporate the strengths that these families are bringing to bear, what they need, and perhaps you could reflect upon, and clearly this metaphor, storyboards and pathways, and it makes me think also of Nancy Gonzalez's programs on bridges, her bridges program on Mexican origin. Exactly. These metaphors are important for families.
Yes.
But could you talk a little bit more about that oath at the end and the pledge, I should say, and where that came from? It sounded like it came from the families. And how did you come to develop that and what role you think it plays? Because it seems like it translates well to online or in person.
Yes, great question, Andrew. And your question really reflects my philosophical beliefs about how to do the work that I do. I really believe of the importance of engaging the communities that we're targeting for many reasons. One, they know the life they live. And if we want to reflect the life they live, rather than imposing our thoughts about what it means to live and to raise children in the context of what they're experiencing, we should ask them. And so we start out, all of our work was piloted before all the scripts. Once we finished a session, a storyboard telling session, we went to what we call our family expert partners, who would say, and that included the kids, the children and the parents, and they would say, oh, we wouldn't do that activity. Mm-hmm. Oh, we wouldn't say things that way. Oh, then how would you say it? And so it's that partnership that then led, even in the SAFE program. We did the same process with the SAFE program. We would take the curriculum sessions that we developed, and then we would have the families tell us whether or not we were on track. And then we would pilot test it after that. But what happened in one of our sessions, we heard one parent say, you know, what I really like about what you're focusing on is that you're really focusing on the strength of Black families. We're strong families. We have a strong history. And so as she was describing this, it ended up realizing that this should be the creed that anchors all of our sessions, because she said, and as she was talking, other parents were just affirming it. Says, yeah. And what we hear so much is people focusing on what's not working in our family. But we've raised healthy children, and so we want that to really be elevated in this program, the Strong African American Families Program. And they named it. They named the program.
That's where the name came from.
They named the PAAS program. Said, you're just talking about a journey that we have to go through with our children. And so it's listening to that. And I think because we listen to the population that we are providing, that we're studying, that we're developing these programs for, they relate to it. And not only that, the programs were based on empirical research, based on their reports of what they told us in this longitudinal research works. So when you build your research that includes not only the empirical and the theoretical framing, but if it's nested in the context of the potential users, it can't be anything but a win-win.
Yeah.
And I attribute the success of the program to the fact that that's what it reflects. It reflects a partnership with the relevant research on these families and refining theories to be much more applicable to how they say their world works, and then having them affirm for us, yes, this is how it works. Yeah.
Well, we can talk more specifically about some of those, and I have questions, but I also want to make sure I invite the audience to throw some Q&As into the Q&A if they have some things that they'd like to discuss. I think, it's really fascinating what you're talking about is, Velma, is sort of, it's important from a concept standpoint, but like what words, what phrases, what themes really kind of carry most of the juice in that oath that you have at the end? Like, how did that come up? Like, what kinds of things do you think really resonates most with the families? Like, how do they talk about their strength?
I'll answer it two ways. And one is a surprising finding, and then I'll circle back around. So the surprising finding was we thought that the technology platform would be just as good as the in-person, because the in-person is really the golden standard that we use, because that's what we know. Well, what we ended up finding was that the electronic or the technology program was much more effective in facilitating those intervention targets designed to reduce risk, because it encouraged parents to talk more about those sensitive, risky risk-related topics, sex, drugs, racism, but the group-based setting, parents exposed to that program, that arm reported greater changes in general parenting processes. And so there's something about
Interesting.
having other parents validate those normative parent developmental issues is important to have in-person people saying, you're doing okay in terms of how you're communicating or monitoring, Andrew. But when it comes to those sensitive topics that parents aren't fully disclosing about that in these small group sessions, because there are a lot of things they're thinking about that they are not saying in the small group sessions. They can say it with the avatars, role play it, disclose, and nobody knows. So I think what the streams for me in terms of families seeing their strengths, one, it's a program that is not directive in terms of telling people what we think they should do. We provide the science, and then the decisions that they make is left up to them. So you're going in, not value laden. So one of our mothers on the in the technology group, she's MJ's mother, and she's a fly mom, meaning that she's off the chain. In a lot of her interaction, active patterns, boundary pushing, but those are things that happen.
Yeah.
And so we could do a lot of things in the technology platform that we can't push that.
Yeah, so it's less threatening. Yeah.
And fathers feeling uncomfortable because the daughter is now going through puberty.
Yeah.
What do I do with Sierra? She's and the avatar dad was going like, she's like, so I think it meets people where they are. I think that's what's that's intriguing to families. It talks about things the way that they would talk about things. The other part of it is, which I didn't say that, but the as they're entering into this virtual world, for the mothers, it's a mixture of gospel and jazz playing. For the kid, it's hip hop. So you enter in, you can create this environment where there's a relatedness, even in the way that you expose people to coming into this program and being a part of this program and seeing people that look like them.
So what seems really beautiful about this is you just have an adaptability here where there are some scientific principles and bedrock to the program that are always core, but then you have it adaptable and flexible enough. And so you can go online, you can be in person, or maybe do a hybrid to get the best of both. I also wanted to ask you a question about that adaptability. There was a question about gender in the Q&A, but also, so what do you see, because you developed this program, you started this many years ago at this point, the online. And so, now that there's a question about gender, there's different ways that we can talk about our own gender and identifications, or different ethnic labels that kids or the parents are going to want to use to describe themselves, or what happened in 2020 with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so on. How do you see this sort of continuing to adapt in the next couple of years? What do you see what this could look like?
So if I had investment that was zillions of dollars, that is exactly where I would take this. I would expand the engines so that we can move things in based on where people are now. At the time that we developed this program, which started in 2007, this openness about transgender and those issues were not relevant in the literature or the way that families were talking about these issues. So it's not only for Black families, but to move it such that you begin to adapt these avatars and change aspects of the program such that it's reflective of the cultural relevance for the families that you're targeting, because the mechanism is there. And what we know is that these universal parenting processes are relatively similar across groups regardless of race and ethnicity. It's when you get to those culturally driven, specific, ecological, contextual processes where the tailoring may have to happen. So I can see, I can really see this as being a platform that can be used to adapt to any kind of family situation across developmental stages, because I'd also like to see younger ages being programs like this being developed for families of younger ages, and also white families, because it's a chance for, there's this big push now of how to talk about race and how to be an anti-racist. And many of the efforts have been targeted toward not only families, the Black families and Latino families and Asian and Pacific, but it's also for white families to begin to think about how to do this. So I can only imagine creating a group of avatar family parents where you have multiple race and ethnicities and geographic contexts and gender oriented, sitting around the table talking about these issues, because the ultimate goal is we want to raise happy, healthy youth, regardless of who you are. The ultimate goal, if you're a parent and if you're someone invested in young people, is to raise healthy youth and create an environment where this can happen. And I see this as a platform where we can begin to think about doing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I could see, I was going to ask you a question about white families and how they could support and act as allies in some of these efforts. And your comment is really interesting to me, because from the avatar standpoint, will be much easier for white parents to talk about issues. They're not going to want to talk. They're not going to really want to talk about it as a group. I think many of them, some of them, yes, I shouldn't say that. But many of them are going to be very reluctant.
Yeah, I really believe that, Andrew, because one of the things that just the difficult topic that some parents have about talking about sex, and the avatars just lay it out. Just all the things that families that parents are worried about. And then for kids, it's tapered in a way that is developmentally appropriate, but these kids are talking about what they're feeling and going through puberty, and what am I supposed to do with these feelings, that they wouldn't say if they were in a small group with another group of kids like them, because they're gonna laugh or be uncomfortable. But I do think that this may be a way, as we're moving forward with addressing the concerns that people are having, and the need of really talking about these difficult topics, including racism, and how to talk to your children about this, and for kids to be thoughtful about this, that this is a platform because you're not threatened. The avatar is not going to tell anybody what you said.
So have you found that with the avatars for Black parents and African-American parents, that the issue of dealing with their experiences of racism and sharing them with the kids, is it easier to at least to get the conversation started in the avatar? Is that your sense? Or
actually, I think, let me put it this way. When we tested the SAFE program, which was in 2000, the discussion around racism and racial discrimination ran way over the time, because the parents really wanted to express how they were feeling and thinking and what their early experiences were like. When we did the in-person in 2009, that's when we tested the PAAS program, conversations were much more subtle, which was interesting. Even on any of the sensitive topics, parents weren't jumping up and down, no, let me tell my story. They were much more subtle. And which then maps directly onto our findings, which is that the parents in the small groups were less likely to be comfortably talking to their children about race-related situations compared to the families in the technology group. Because the avatars share their stories similar to the stories we mapped it really from some of the videos from the SAFE program, similar to their stories, and then the parents can then share their stories. So I do think there's something protective I know there's something that it's private and it's secure, and it creates a safe space for families to begin to explore areas that may be uncomfortable for them, and maybe also a great way of families that are managing the sexual transitioning of their own children to get in touch with that, and for children to have a safe space to explore. Yeah.
Well, clearly and then, I mean, Velma, we could go on for hours about this. We only got 3 minutes. I would love to keep talking with you more about, but the point that you
I'll just fly out to UCLA in a few minutes so we can keep continuing.
Come on out, we'll have you. The sun is out, it's a nice day. But what you highlighted there is what makes this so important for adolescents is that it's not just about race, or it's not just about sex. About puberty, but for Black and African American families, and I shouldn't be telling this, you know this better than I, but it's the intersection of these things. And it's really when you have the intersection of a pubertally mature girl or boy who also are going to, society is going to treat them differently because they're Black and African American. It's that intersection that just makes this such a significant issue for these families. And what your program is doing is providing a variety of ways to help them have these conversations and to work through some of these challenges with using the strength that they have. Exactly.
And we deliberately plant that seed to prepare families for that day, because, you need to feel strong. You need to bask in your own success, regardless of what other people are telling you about you, or telling your child about him or her or their self. So it's really important. And I agree, Andrew. It's been a delight. I think we have 2 minutes.
We have 2 minutes.
Questions. I can't believe people just go bananas. Suggestions when children, I guess it's okay if I read this.
Yeah, I think we addressed Adenia's question. She was asking about when parents and their own experiences with trauma and how you deal with it. And I think we dealt with that as we were talking about the niceness of your online version, the virtual version.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing about it, and I'll wrap it up with this, is that what's happening in these separate child session and parent sessions, they both have, remember, these printouts from these comic, like a comic strip. They bring it to the family session and they talk about it. And then they talk about what do we do about this as our family to begin to address these issues. And so the race-related experience is one of them. In fact, one of the issues that occurred in one of our sessions is that a child reported to Jonathan what he was going through at his school, because he was one of the only Black male in his class, the middle school class. And he then was able to share that with his parent because he wasn't telling her, because he wasn't sure if he should. So then the parent had a chance then to see the comic strip and say, oh, MJ, I didn't know you were going through this, and set up a plan then to go to school to advocate for her child. So I think we're at 3 o'clock.
Well, anyway, well, Velma, I want to say that, I should tell the audience, this is just as many, I think some of you here know Velma and her work. This is just such a small little taste of so much that has gone into this very important work. And, on behalf of the Center and the National Scientific Council of Adolescents, thank you for joining us today. Our mission really is to translate and disseminate the science of adolescence and to really help lift up empirically based programs that can help promote the development of our youth. And clearly your program is one of the stars out there, and thank you so much. For those of you who are here today, just as a reminder, you can access the video from the session and other resources at the UCLA CDA website later this week. Megan will throw the chat into the link. And we'll also be sending an email with links to all of the resources that Velma provided to us that came up in the discussion today. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Again, what a delight to have you, Velma, to share your important work. And next time we'll do this in LA out on a veranda and have us filmed and have a nice conversation about your great work.
It's just, I'm holding you to it. And Megan, remember, she's a witness.
All right, well, take care, everyone. Have a nice week. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Take care.